He walked away from her 4 years ago because he believed power mattered more than love. He was wrong. Tonight, standing beneath the cold glow of Christmas lights on a Manhattan street, Adrian Moreau, a man who had crushed rivals, buried enemies, and built an empire worth billions, froze completely. Because 20 feet away stood the woman he never stopped loving. And beside her, holding her hand, was a little girl with dark eyes that looked exactly like his own. 4 years old, wearing a red coat, laughing at the falling snow. Adrian's chest cracked open right there on the sidewalk. He had spent 4 years building everything, and somehow he had missed everything that actually mattered. If this story hits you, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let me see how far this one travels. Now stay with me. Every part of this story is worth it. The deal closed at 9:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Adrian Moreau knew the exact time because he checked his watch the moment Marcus Vail, 63 years old, fourth-generation steel magnate, a man who had never once sold anything to anyone under 50, extended his hand across the mahogany conference table and said quietly, "You've got yourself a partnership, son." Adrian shook it, firm, clean, the way his father had taught him back when his father was still someone worth learning from. Around the table, lawyers shuffled papers. Assistants typed. Two of Marcus's senior partners were already on their phones, probably relaying the news to people who would care about it in the morning. The Vail-Moreau Infrastructure Consolidation, $430 million, a network of East Coast freight corridors, and a projected 7-year return that the financial press would spend the next week arguing over, was done. 18 months of negotiations, 3 collapsed preliminary agreements, 1 near lawsuit that Adrian had killed personally by calling Marcus's eldest son at 2 in the morning and telling him without warmth or elaboration exactly how the alternative would unfold. Done. Adrian accepted a glass of bourbon he didn't drink, smiled at the things that required smiling at, and was out of the building in 11 minutes. The cold hit him on the sidewalk like a flat hand against his face. Manhattan in late December had a specific kind of cold. Not the deep freeze of upstate, not the wet chill of Boston, but something urban and relentless, carrying exhaust and perfume and the collective body heat of 8 million people pressed against a hard winter sky. Snow had started an hour ago. Fine stuff, decorative almost, drifting through the cone of light beneath every lamppost. The city looked the way Christmas cards always pretended cities looked. Adrian stood on the sidewalk outside Vail Capital's Midtown offices and felt absolutely nothing. His driver, Thomas, had the car idling at the curb. Black Escalade, tinted windows, the engine a low murmur under the sound of foot traffic and distant music. Christmas music, bleeding out of a shop somewhere. He couldn't identify the song. Didn't try. "Back to the penthouse?" Thomas asked, already moving toward the door handle. "Give me a minute." Thomas understood. He always understood. That was why Adrian paid him what he paid him. Not for the driving, but for the discretion to recognize when his employer needed to simply stand somewhere and breathe. Adrian stood on the sidewalk and watched the snow fall and tried to locate something inside himself that felt like satisfaction. $430 million. The largest single deal he had closed without leveraging the network. The network, that was the word he used internally for the infrastructure of favors, threats, and organized criminality that had built the first version of his fortune. 3 years ago, he had begun the long, careful work of separating himself from it. Laundering wasn't the right word. Restructuring was closer. Moving money through legitimate channels, acquiring companies, building a public face that could withstand scrutiny. It was slow, and it was expensive, and there were men who considered it a betrayal. He was still managing that. But tonight, $430 million in clean money, negotiated across a boardroom table by lawyers who didn't know his history. That was something. That was supposed to be something. He felt the snow on the back of his neck, felt nothing else. He was 34 years old and worth somewhere north of $2 billion, depending on how the markets closed, and he was standing alone on a Manhattan sidewalk on Christmas Eve with bourbon he hadn't touched still in his hand and no particular desire to go anywhere. He set the glass down on a newspaper box, pushed his hands into his coat pockets, started walking, no destination, just the noise of the city and the cold air and the faint, persistent sense that he had optimized his life so thoroughly that there was nothing left inside it that surprised him. He walked 4 blocks before he saw her. But he almost didn't. That was the thing he would come back to later, lying awake at 3 in the morning in the weeks that followed. How close he had come to simply not looking up. He had his eyes down, watching the sidewalk, stepping around a group of tourists stopped in front of a holiday window display. He moved left to avoid them, looked up to check his path, and there she was, Elena Hartwell, standing beneath a canopy of lights strung between 2 lampposts, the kind of improvised Christmas decoration that appeared in certain neighborhoods every year, hung by residents who refused to cede the holiday entirely to the commercial corridors. She was wearing a dark green coat he didn't recognize, her hair longer than he remembered, and she was crouching down to the level of the child beside her, adjusting the child's scarf with the particular focused tenderness of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The child was small, 4, maybe, red coat, dark hair, a little face turned up toward the lights with an expression of pure, unself-conscious wonder, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, both arms stretched out to try and catch snowflakes. Adrian stopped walking. His foot came down wrong on a crack in the sidewalk, and he stumbled slightly and caught himself on a parking meter, and for 3 full seconds he just stood there with his hand on cold metal and looked at them. The child turned, still laughing, and looked directly at him. Dark eyes. The precise shape and darkness of them hit him like a physical impact, a recognition so immediate and so violent that his vision actually narrowed for a moment, the edges of his peripheral world going gray. He knew those eyes. He had seen them in his own reflection every morning for 34 years. Elena straightened, turned, and went absolutely still. They were maybe 20 feet apart. The crowd moved around them both, couples, families, tourists, all the anonymous life of a city that did not stop for anyone's private catastrophe. And Adrian stood there with his heart doing something irregular and wrong in his chest, and looked at the woman he had spent 4 years trying to stop thinking about. She looked older, not badly, more like she had earned the years rather than just survived them. There was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a wariness. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite classify, something between shock and a kind of grim, resigned recognition, like a person who had always known a particular storm was coming and was simply noting that it had finally arrived. The little girl tugged her hand. "Mama, who's that man?" Elena didn't answer immediately. The snow kept falling. Adrian took 1 step forward, and then another, and Elena held her ground, which was the most Elena Hartwell thing she could possibly have done. And when he was close enough that they could speak without raising their voices, close enough that he could see the snowflakes catching in her hair, he said the only thing he could manage, "Elena." Her jaw tightened. "Adrian." The child looked between them with the alert, instinctual curiosity of someone very young who has learned to read adult silences. She pressed herself slightly against Elena's leg, but didn't hide behind it. Adrian looked at the child. Up close, the resemblance it wasn't subtle. It wasn't a matter of interpretation, or wishful thinking, or the tricks a guilty conscience plays at distance. It was simply, plainly, undeniably true. He looked back at Elena. She met his gaze and didn't look away. And he understood all at once and completely what that steadiness meant. It wasn't defiance. It was the posture of a woman who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and was now watching the moment she'd been bracing for arrive at last, and had simply decided she was not going to be the one to flinch. "How old?" he said. Not a question exactly. The words came out rough, scraped. "4," Elena said. 1 syllable, flat and exact, and devastating. She agreed to coffee only because of Rosalie. That was what she told him, standing there on the sidewalk while the snow thickened and her daughter asked twice more who the man was and why Mama looked like that. She agreed to coffee because Rosalie was 4 years old and exhausted and wired on holiday excitement, and a sidewalk conversation in a snowstorm was not the place for whatever conversation this was going to be. Not because she owed him anything. She wanted him to understand that. "I know," Adrian said. He didn't think she believed him. He wasn't entirely sure he believed himself. They found a cafe 3 blocks away, a small Brooklyn-adjacent spot that had wandered north of its natural neighborhood, exposed brick, and the smell of cinnamon and the low murmur of people who had nowhere more pressing to be on Christmas Eve. Elena ordered hot chocolate for Rosalie without looking at the menu. She'd been here before. Rosalie sat between them in the booth, working on her drink with the solemn concentration of a person engaged in critical work. She had Adrian's eyes and Elena's mouth, and a way of tilting her head when she was thinking that Adrian did not recognize from either of them, but which felt, somehow, entirely its own thing. His daughter. He kept having to re-arrive at that word. It would settle for a moment, and then the reality of it would rear up again, fresh and enormous, and he would have to absorb it all over again. His daughter was sitting across from him with hot chocolate on her upper lip, and she didn't know who he was. "What's her name?" he said. "Rosalie." Elena had both hands around her coffee cup. She was watching him with that same steady, guarded attention, measuring something. "Rosalie Claire Hartwell." Hartwell. Not Moreau. He said nothing about that. He had no standing to say anything about that. "When did you—" He stopped, rebuilt the sentence. "When did you find out?" 6 weeks after you left." Left. The word sat between them like something dropped. He had not technically left. He had told her, in the measured and deliberate language of a man who had rehearsed the speech and believed the rehearsal made it kinder, that the direction of his life was not compatible with what she deserved, that the things he was building required a focus he couldn't divide, that she should not wait for him. He had said all of this in the kitchen of her apartment on a Tuesday morning in January, and she had listened without interrupting. And when he was finished, she had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Okay, Adrian," and walked to the window and stood there until he left. He had told himself many times in the years since that she had understood, that the clean break was the kindness. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." Her voice was controlled, professional almost, like she had practiced this version too. "I thought about telling you. I thought about it a lot. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you had just spent 20 minutes explaining to me that your life didn't have room for the things that mattered to me. I wasn't going to hand you a reason to feel obligated. Rosalie deserved a father, not an obligation." The word landed clean and hard. Obligation. "Elena, I'm not looking for an apology." She picked up her cup, set it down without drinking. "I'm not angry. I was angry for a long time. I'm not anymore. I need you to understand that I made the decision I thought was right, and I would make it again." Rosalie looked up from her hot chocolate. "Mama, can I have a cookie?" "In a minute, baby." Rosalie went back to her drink, untroubled. The world of adults was complicated and slow and generally not worth full attention until food was directly involved. Adrian watched her, the way she held the mug with both hands, the small red bow clipped to the side of her hair that had survived the evening only partially. Half of it was loose, tilted sideways, holding on to approximately 3 strands. "She doesn't know," he said. "No." "Does she ask?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "She asks sometimes. I tell her that her father wasn't someone who was able to be there and that it had nothing to do with her and that she is loved completely by the people who are in her life." She paused. "I say it the same way every time. She seems to accept it. That's—" He stopped. He didn't have a word for what that was. "It's the truth," Elena said. "The edited version of the truth. The version she's old enough for." Rosalie tugged Elena's sleeve. "Mama, the man has snow on his coat." They both looked. He did. A dusting of it across the shoulders from the walk over, not fully melted yet. "He does," Elena agreed. Rosalie studied him with frank, uncomplicated interest. "Did you walk in the snow?" "I did," Adrian said. His voice came out strange, careful in a way he wasn't accustomed to. "We walked in the snow, too." She demonstrated by wiggling her fingers, possibly indicating walking, possibly indicating something else entirely. "I tried to catch one on my tongue, but Mama said the ones near the street have car stuff in them." "Your Mama's right." Rosalie appeared to accept this verdict. She looked at him for another moment with those dark eyes that were so completely, unmistakably his, that specific shape, that specific depth, and then apparently decided he was acceptable and returned to her hot chocolate. Adrian looked at Elena. Elena was watching him with an expression that had shifted slightly. The wariness was still there, but something else had come into it. Something more complicated, less resolved. "I want to be in her life," Adrian said. Elena closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "Adrian, I'm not asking for anything specific right now. I'm not making demands. I just need you to hear me say it." "I hear you. I missed 4 years. I know you did. I want to—" He stopped. The sentence had about 15 different endings, and none of them were quite right. "I don't know what I want exactly. I just know that I'm not going to walk away from this." Elena set both palms flat on the table. It was a gesture he remembered, the way she grounded herself when she was thinking through something she wasn't ready to say yet. He had forgotten he remembered it until this exact moment. "You don't get to decide that unilaterally," she said. "She is my daughter. I have been her parent, alone, for 4 years. You don't walk back into this because you had a revelation on a sidewalk and announce that things are going to be different now. I'm not announcing. You're very close to announcing." He stopped. She was right. He could feel it. The old habit of certainty. The posture of a man who moved through the world by deciding what would happen next and then making it happen. It had served him extremely well in almost every context he had ever been in. It had no place here. "Tell me what you need," he said. She looked at him. The question seemed to catch her off guard, like she had been braced for a different kind of push, and the absence of it left her momentarily recalibrating. "I need to think," she said finally. "I need to not have this conversation on Christmas Eve with Rosalie sitting right here." "Fair. And I need you to understand that whatever happens next, whatever we figure out, it's going to be slow. It's going to be on her terms. She's 4. She doesn't know you exist as anything other than an abstract concept. You can't rush that." "I understand." "Do you?" There was something sharp in it, not cruel, just honest. "Because you have spent your entire adult life moving fast, Adrian, deciding things and executing. That's not how this works." He held her gaze. "I understand," he said again, quieter. She studied him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, complicated and private and not entirely resolved. Rosalie finished her hot chocolate, set the mug down with finality. "Mama? Cookie?" Elena exhaled. The tension in her shoulders shifted. Not gone, but redistributed into something more functional. She signaled the server. Adrian sat across from his daughter while she ate a shortbread cookie shaped like a Christmas tree with green icing, and he tried to memorize every detail of her face with the desperate, helpless attention of a man attempting to photograph something through glass. Always the awareness of the barrier between himself and the thing he was trying to hold. He didn't sleep that night. He went back to the penthouse, 52nd floor. The kind of view of Manhattan that real estate listings described in superlatives he had long since stopped registering, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows in his coat, still on, and looked at the city below and tried to organize himself. The deal was closed. $430 million. Marcus Vail's handshake. The thing he had worked 18 months toward. He could not access a single feeling about it. What he could access, the specific dark shade of Rosalie's eyes, the way she tilted her head at the falling snow, the shortbread cookie with the green icing and the bite taken from the bottom instead of the top, which seemed like it might be a personal philosophy of some kind. 4 years. He did the math involuntarily, the way you do when you're trying to understand a number that doesn't fit anywhere you know how to put it. He had left Elena in January. If she had found out 6 weeks later, that was February, March. Rosalie would have been born in October, November. She would have been... He tried to count backward and found that the arithmetic felt violent, each calculation arriving with the weight of everything he hadn't been there for. He took off his coat eventually, sat on the couch that faced the windows, did not turn on any lights. The city provided enough. His phone showed 17 unread messages. Congratulations on the Vail deal, forwarded through channels, the machinery of his professional life still churning on schedule. He put the phone face down on the cushion beside him. He thought about Elena's face on the sidewalk, the specific brace of her body when she recognized him. Not fear, not quite anger, but the posture of someone absorbing impact. She had been absorbing impacts for 4 years, alone. Working 2 jobs, he suspected, from the way she'd looked. Not poorly, not struggling. but with the particular quality of someone who had learned to operate at full capacity with no margin for rest. He thought about what she'd said. Rosalie deserved a father, not an obligation. He had heard it as a rebuke. He thought now it might have been a warning. His phone lit up. A text from his attorney, Daniel Park, flagged urgent. VP of Salvatore Group reached out. Wants a meeting before end of year. Says it's about transition logistics. Adrian stared at the message. Victor Salvatore. He had been expecting this. Had been expecting it for months, in the way you expect bad weather. Tracking the pressure, watching the indicators, knowing the storm was coming and calculating when it would arrive. Victor had been Adrian's primary contact point within the network for 6 years. Not the top. There were men above Victor that even Adrian didn't have clear sightlines on, men whose names appeared on very few documents anywhere. But Victor was the operational center of gravity, the man who ran the infrastructure that Adrian's early money had moved through. When Adrian had begun the separation process, he had been careful, methodical. He had given the network plenty of notice, honored every outstanding commitment, made sure there was nothing on his end that looked like flight or betrayal. It had cost him, financially and in other currencies, but he had done it cleanly. Victor had accepted it, or had appeared to. A meeting before end of year about transition logistics did not feel like acceptance. Adrian set his phone back down, face down again. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city lay below him clean and bright and indifferent, every window a small lit square of someone else's Christmas. He thought about Rosalie eating her cookie, bottom first. He thought about Elena saying slow. He thought about the 4 years he had spent building something that, tonight, had finally closed at $430 million and felt like absolutely nothing. Victor's message could wait until morning. He sat in the dark and looked at the city, and for the first time in a very long time, he let himself feel the full weight of what he had thrown away, not as an abstraction or a lesson learned, but as a real and specific loss, the weight of a child he hadn't held, and mornings he hadn't seen, and a woman who had stood at a window after he gave his speech and waited for him to leave. He stayed there until the sky began to go gray at the edges. Then he called Elena. She answered on the 4th ring. He could hear Rosalie in the background, some cartoon sound, the bright synthetic noise of early morning children's television. "It's 6 a.m., Elena said. Not accusatory, just noting. "I know. I'm sorry. Did you sleep?" "No." A pause. The cartoon noise continued in the background. "Adrian, I just needed to hear that it was real," he said. "That's all. I don't need anything else from you right now. I just needed—" He stopped. The sentence was embarrassing in its nakedness. He let it be embarrassing. "I'll call you later at a normal hour, if that's all right." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," Elena said. He could hear something in the word. Not warmth, not yet, but the absence of active cold, a neutrality that contained maybe the distant possibility of something else. He said goodbye and hung up and sat in his penthouse at 6 in the morning with the gray winter light coming through the windows and his city spread out below him like an empire he was no longer certain he wanted. So he called her at noon. She was brief, practical. She had talked with her sister Kara, who knew about Adrian, knew the rough shape of it, if not every detail. She had decided she was willing to meet once more, without Rosalie present, to have the actual conversation, to figure out what this looked like, if it looked like anything at all. She named a day. 2 days after Christmas. A coffee place in her neighborhood. He agreed to everything she said without negotiating a single term, which was, for Adrian Moreau, a genuinely unprecedented event. The 2 days between Christmas Eve and the meeting were the longest he could remember since adolescence. He filled them with work because work was the only container he knew how to use. Returned calls, reviewed the Vail partnership documents, had a 2-hour call with his CFO about the first quarter restructuring, dealt with 3 issues that required dealing with. He also, at 2 in the morning on the 26th, opened a browser on his personal laptop, not the work one, not the one his assistant managed, and searched child development 4-year-old. He read for 3 hours. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly. Some kind of manual, some protocol for existing in a 4-year-old's life when you had not previously existed in it. He found a lot of articles that assumed a level of prior involvement he didn't have. He found some things about consistency, about patience, about how children that age understood relationships primarily through repeated, reliable presence rather than through explanations. Repeated, reliable presence. He put the laptop away and lay on his back in the dark and thought about what his life currently contained by way of repeated, reliable presence. The answer was Thomas, his driver, who was 61 and married and had 3 adult children. Daniel Park, his attorney. His housekeeper, Mrs. Nguyen, who came Tuesdays and Fridays and left the refrigerator restocked without being asked, which he had always appreciated. That was approximately it. He had built an empire with approximately that. Bam! She was there when he arrived at the cafe, already seated, already with coffee, already composed. She was wearing a different coat from Christmas Eve. Charcoal gray, well cut, the kind of thing you wear when you want to look capable without looking like you're trying to look capable. He sat across from her. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Don't thank me yet." He almost smiled. Almost. She had notes, actual notes, on her phone. He could see her glancing at it, not secretively but matter-of-factly, the way a person refers to a list they made because they know themselves well enough to know they'll otherwise forget the important things when the conversation goes sideways. He found this so completely, painfully Elena that he had to look away for a moment. "I'm going to say some things," she started, "and I need you to just hear them without making it a negotiation." "Okay." Rosalie's welfare is the only thing that matters in this conversation, not your feelings about the last 4 years. Not my feelings about the last 4 years, just her. Agreed. If you want to be in her life, really in it, you need to understand that she has a stable, structured routine. She has a preschool she loves, a pediatrician she's not afraid of, a group of friends whose parents I know and trust. Her life is not going to be disrupted to accommodate your schedule or your needs. You fit into her life, not the other way around. I understand. She looked at him, measuring. You're agreeing to everything very quickly. Because you're right about everything. Adrian, Elena. He kept his voice level. I know who I've been. I know how I've operated. I know what I lost by operating that way. I don't have a competing agenda here. I have a daughter I didn't know existed and 4 years of time I can't get back and a woman across from me who handled everything I failed to handle. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here because she exists and I need to figure out how to be something other than absent. The cafe was quiet around them. Someone at the counter ordered something complicated. The espresso machine started up. Elena was looking at him with an expression he could not read at all. You're different, she said finally. I'm older. That's not what I mean. He waited. You were always certain, she said, about everything. It was one of the things. She stopped, redirected. It's different, seeing you not certain. I'm certain about some things. Like what? Like not walking away from this again, he said. I'm very certain about that. She looked at her coffee. He watched her process something. He could see it moving through her, the way certain things move through people who have learned to keep their internal weather off their face but haven't entirely succeeded. Kara thinks I'm insane for meeting you, she said. Kara was always smarter than me. Something moved at the corner of Elena's mouth. Not quite a smile. The precursor to one. She's right that there are risks, Elena said. Rosalie gets attached. She gets attached fast and hard, and if you come into her life and then disappear, I won't. You said you wouldn't leave before too. The sentence sat between them clean and exact, the way true things sometimes do. I know, Adrian said. I can't give you a guarantee. I can only tell you that I understand what's at stake now in a way I didn't before, and that I'm going to show you, whatever that takes, however long. She looked at him for a long time. Start small, she said finally. I'll tell her. I'll figure out how to tell her that you're a friend, someone who wants to spend some time with us. We'll see how she responds. She paused. And you need to understand that if at any point I think it's hurting her, it stops. No argument, no negotiation. No argument, he agreed. She picked up her coffee. He watched her hands, the slight tension in them, the control. She was braver than he had deserved, and he knew it, and he was going to spend whatever time he had left making sure the accounting on that came out right. "There's something else," she said. She wasn't looking at him now, looking at the table. "Something I need to know before this goes any further." "Okay, the things you were involved in, before, the network, or whatever you called it." She looked up. Her eyes were steady, direct. "Is it over? Are you clear of it?" The question arrived like a hand reaching into his chest. He thought about Daniel Park's text, Victor Salvatore's meeting request. He thought about a 4-year-old girl with his eyes and a red coat, catching snowflakes in the dark. "I'm working on it," he said. Elena held his gaze. "That's not the same as yes." "No," he said. "It's not." She nodded slowly, set her cup down. "Then that's the real conversation, isn't it?" He looked at her. "Whatever you need to do to get clear of it," she said quietly, "do it fast. Because I will not let Rosalie anywhere near whatever that is. And I think—" She stopped. Her voice, for the first time, shifted. Something cracked slightly in the precise architecture of her composure. "I think you already know that." He did know that. He had known it since 6 in the morning on Christmas Day, standing at his window with Victor Salvatore's name on his phone screen. He had known it the moment he looked at Rosalie's face. "I'll take care of it," he said. "Adrian." Her voice was low, serious. "Be careful. Whatever it is, be careful." He looked at the woman across from him, at the tiredness in her eyes and the strength in her jaw, and the way she had held 4 years together by herself without ever asking him for a single thing. "I will," he said. Outside, the last of the Christmas snow was melting into the gray Brooklyn gutters. The holiday was over. The city was resuming its ordinary velocity. Adrian Moreau sat across from Elena Hartwell and understood, with the specific clarity that only arrives when something is already in motion, that the thing he had just promised her was going to cost him something significant, and that for the first time in his life, the cost didn't matter at all. He had one more meeting before the year ended. Daniel Park texted at 4 p.m. Salvatore's people called again, pushing for tomorrow. "They're calling it urgent." Adrian typed back, "Set it up, my location, not his." He put the phone in his pocket, walked back out into the cold. Above him, the city was loud and gray and indifferent as always. Somewhere across Brooklyn, a 4-year-old girl was probably having dinner, probably making a mess of it, probably asking her mother something relentless and specific about how snowflakes were made. He had a daughter. He had a woman who was not his, not yet, maybe not ever, but there, who had kept his daughter alive and loved and safe for 4 years without him. And he had a phone full of messages from a man who was about to remind him, very clearly, that the version of Adrian Moreau that had walked away from Elena 4 years ago still had debts outstanding. His phone buzzed again. Park. Salvatore himself wants to be there, not just representatives. Adrian read the message twice. Victor Salvatore didn't attend preliminary meetings. Victor Salvatore attended final ones. The cold pressed in around him. He thought about Rosalie tilting her head at the snow, thought about Elena saying be careful with something in her voice that was almost, the voice of a woman who still had something to lose. He started walking. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. The restaurant Victor Salvatore chose was called Osteria Nera. It was closed for the holidays. Had been closed since the 23rd. A hand-lettered sign in the window. The interior dark behind frosted glass. But the door was unlocked when Adrian arrived at 8 the following evening, and there were 2 men in the vestibule who didn't speak and didn't need to. Men with the specific stillness of people paid to be present rather than to do anything in particular. At least not yet. Adrian had brought no one. This was a calculation. Bringing security would have read as fear. Coming alone read as something else. Either confidence or contempt. And he was comfortable with either interpretation. One of the men checked him. Efficient, professional, hands moving quickly across his coat and jacket and the small of his back. Adrian stood still for it. Clean. He had left the Glock in the Escalade. Thomas was parked 2 blocks east with instructions to check in every 30 minutes, and if Adrian didn't confirm the 4th check-in, to call Daniel Park and no one else. It was the kind of contingency planning that, in another life, he would have found excessive. He didn't find it excessive tonight. The restaurant's main room was lit by a single arrangement of candles at the center table. Actual candles. Not the fake flicker of a dim ambiance setting, real wax and real flame that moved slightly in the draft when Adrian pushed through the inner door. The smell was olive oil and garlic and something older underneath. The absorbed history of a room that had hosted 1,000 meals and whatever else happened in places like this after the last public customer went home. Victor Salvatore was already seated. He was 61 years old and looked like a man who had eaten well and slept well and never once experienced a consequence he hadn't chosen in advance. Silver hair, cut close. A suit that cost more than Adrian's first car. Hands flat on the tablecloth, fingers spread slightly, like a man who wanted you to see he wasn't holding anything. He was always holding something. Adrian. Victor's voice was warm. It was always warm. That was the thing about Victor. The warmth was real in its way. It wasn't performance. He genuinely liked people. He liked Adrian. That had never made him safe. Sit down. I had them open a Barolo. The 2015. You remember the 2015? Adrian pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Didn't touch the wine. Daniel said you wanted to talk about transition logistics, Adrian said. Victor smiled. He had a good smile. The kind that reached the eyes, which made it harder to track. I wanted to see you. It's been 8 months. We can call it logistics. What do you want, Victor? The smile didn't leave, but something behind it recalibrated. The warmth stayed on the surface. Underneath it, something colder moved. I want to understand something, Victor said. He picked up his wine, turned the glass slowly. You've been very careful these past 3 years. Very deliberate. I respect that. The way you've moved, clean, no loose ends, everyone compensated fairly. I've said that to people, Adrian. I've defended the way you've handled it. I appreciate that. But there's a feeling, Victor set the glass down, among certain people, a feeling that the exit has been longer than necessary. Structural separation at this scale takes time. Yes. Victor nodded slowly. It does. But there are people who look at the timeline and wonder whether the timeline is about structure or whether the timeline is about something else. About gathering information, perhaps. Building a record. The candle flame moved between them. That's an interesting thing to wonder, Adrian said. Isn't it? Victor's eyes were steady, not threatening. That was the craftsmanship of the man. He never threatened directly. He simply described scenarios with such placid precision that the threat became atmospheric, present in the whole room rather than in any particular word. I told those people they were wrong, that you were a man of your word, and your word had been given, and that was the end of it. And they believed you? Some of them. Victor leaned back slightly. Others are harder to convince. They point to the Vail deal. They say a man who just closed $400 million in clean money has no incentive to stay quiet about what he knows. I've been quiet for 3 years. You've been exiting for 3 years. There's a difference. He picked up the wine again. Once you're fully out, once there's nothing left connecting you to us, the calculation changes. That's what they're saying. They want assurances. Adrian looked at him. What kind of assurances? Continued participation. Victor said it simply, like he was suggesting Adrian join a board committee. Nothing heavy, nothing that conflicts with the legitimate operation you've built. Certain introductions, certain doors that your current position allows you to open. Periodic. He spread his hands. We're not asking for the old arrangement. We understand those days are behind you. We're asking for a consulting relationship, informal, discreet. The restaurant was very quiet. Somewhere in the back, a pipe knocked once. Settled. Adrian sat with the word consulting and what it actually meant and let the silence run long enough that Victor's expression shifted fractionally. Not much, but enough. No, Adrian said. Victor was still for a moment. Adrian. No. He kept his voice level, not aggressive, just clear. That's my answer. I made the terms of my exit clear 3 years ago. I honored every commitment. I'm not re-entering in any capacity. Victor looked at him with something that was not quite disappointment and not quite anger, but lived in the space between them. You understand what I'm telling you. The people who have concerns. I understand what you're telling me. Then you understand that my ability to protect you from those concerns is contingent on my being able to give them something. I'm not asking you to protect me. Adrian? Victor's voice dropped. Not menacing, almost gentle. which was worse. You have a great deal more to protect than yourself now. Adrian went very still. Victor watched him. The candle flame moved. I saw an interesting thing, Victor said, casually, terribly casually. A few days ago. Christmas Eve. My nephew was in Midtown. He does some work up there, you know how it is. And he mentioned seeing you on the street. Said you stopped to talk to a woman. A young woman. With a child. The air in the room changed temperature. Lovely little girl, he said. Victor's tone was light, conversational, a man describing weather. Dark hair, looked a bit like... He paused, tilted his head. Well, he couldn't say for certain who she looked like, but he took a photograph. Just habit, you know. The people around me have certain habits. Adrian's hands were flat on the table. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, could feel the specific, controlled effort of keeping his face neutral while something cold and violent moved through him. You should be careful, he said, about where you go next with this. I'm not going anywhere with it. Victor sounded almost surprised, hurt, even, at the suggestion. I'm telling you what exists, what other people might do with what exists. That's out of my hands. If I can't give those people something that satisfies their concerns. He leaned forward slightly. You see the position? Adrian saw the position. It was the oldest position in this kind of arrangement. The leverage was never about the man himself. It was always about the thing the man couldn't afford to lose. And Victor had understood from a photograph taken by a nephew on Christmas Eve exactly what Adrian could not afford to lose. He had known this moment was coming. He had known it was coming, and he had sat with Elena in a Brooklyn cafe 2 days ago and told her he would handle it, and he had meant it. And sitting here now with the candle between them and Victor's pleasant, patient face across the table, he understood that handling it was going to require doing something he had been carefully, deliberately building toward for 3 years. Something that could not be undone. I need a week, Adrian said. Victor's expression shifted, a small, satisfied adjustment, not quite a smile. Of course, the new year is a natural... Not to consider your offer, Adrian held his gaze. I'm not considering it. I need a week to put some things in order. Victor was quiet for a moment, reading him. And then? And then we'll have a different conversation. Something moved in Victor's eyes. Not alarm. Not yet. Something more like sharpened attention. The look of a man recalibrating quickly, because the variable he thought he understood had just behaved unexpectedly. All right, Victor said. A week. Adrian stood, buttoned his coat. The girl, Victor said, behind him, still in that light conversational register. She's beautiful. You must be... A pause. Proud. Adrian walked out without looking back. The cold outside felt like something he needed. He stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in, 1 breath, 2, 3, and let the city noise settle around him while the thing happening in his chest worked itself out. His hands were steady. They had been steady in there, which was the important thing. Victor would have been watching for tremors. He texted Thomas. Coming to the car. The Escalade was where he'd left it. He got in and Thomas pulled out without being asked. Home? Thomas said. No. Adrian stared out the tinted window at the passing city. Drive. Thomas drove. They moved through Manhattan's post-holiday streets, quieter than usual, the city still metabolizing the season. Adrian sat in the back and thought with the specific, compressed efficiency of a man who has learned to make high-stakes decisions quickly and live with them. He had 3 assets Victor didn't know about. The first was a set of encrypted drives held by Daniel Park in a safe deposit box that Park himself had never opened, containing 6 years of documented transactions, communications, and cross-referenced financial records that connected the Salvatore network to 11 public officials and 3 federal judges, among others. Adrian had been building this for the last 3 years of his exit, quietly, piece by piece, the way you build something you hope you'll never need to use. The second was a federal prosecutor named Whitmore, James Whitmore, Eastern District, a man with a reputation for taking cases other prosecutors declined and seeing them through to the end, who had reached out 18 months ago through a channel so indirect it took Adrian's attorney 2 weeks to trace it back to its source. Whitmore knew about the drives. Not their contents, not yet, but their existence. There had been a conversation. Tentative, careful, nothing committed on either side. A door left open. The third was something Victor didn't know existed. A sealed record, filed with a private legal firm in Delaware 18 months ago, documenting a specific set of transactions that connected Victor Salvatore personally, not the network, not the organization, but Victor specifically, to the disappearance of a union official in 2019. Adrian had come across this not through his own investigation, but by accident, through a financial audit of one of his acquired companies that had done work for a Salvatore-connected contractor. He had filed it and said nothing and waited to see if it would ever become necessary. It had become necessary. He took out his phone. "Daniel," he said when Park answered, "I need to see you tomorrow morning, early." "How early?" 6. A pause. "Do I need to be worried?" "Not yet," Adrian said. Get the files. The ones you've never opened." Another pause. Park was careful, intelligent, and had represented Adrian long enough to know when to ask questions and when not to. This was a when not to moment. 6 a.m., Park said. "My office." Adrian hung up. He went to Elena's building at 10 p.m. He didn't call first. He knew he should have. He rang the buzzer anyway and stood in the cold vestibule and waited, and after a long 30 seconds, Elena's voice came through the intercom. "Adrian?" "I need 10 minutes," he said. "I'm sorry, I'll keep my voice down." The door buzzed open. She met him in the hallway outside her apartment door, not inviting him in. Rosalie was asleep, he understood, and this was the boundary, and he respected it. She had a blanket around her shoulders over what looked like pajamas, and her hair was down, and she looked tired in the specific way of a person who had been carrying too much for too long and had only recently stopped pretending otherwise. She took one look at his face. "What happened?" she said. He told her. Not everything. Not the details, not the names, not the specific mechanisms of what he was going to do. But the shape of it, Victor. The meeting. The photograph of her and Rosalie on the street. Her face went through several things as he talked. The blanket tightened around her shoulders. When he stopped, she stood very still. "He had someone photograph us," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "On Christmas Eve." "Yes." She looked past him at nothing. "I had a feeling," she said quietly, "when we were walking back from the cafe. I told myself I was being paranoid." She refocused on him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end it," he said. "Permanently. There's a way. It's going to take a few days to set up, and it's going to make some people very unhappy, but it will be over." He held her gaze. "I need you to know that. It will be over. And until it's over, I want to move you and Rosalie somewhere for a few days, somewhere Victor can't find you easily. Your sister's place, maybe, or my sister lives in New Jersey, Adrian, not a safe house." "Elena, no." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "I am not taking my daughter out of her home and disrupting her schedule because of something you brought to my door." The sentence landed with precision. "I know," he said. "I know this is because of me. I'm not—" She stopped, controlled herself. "I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because you need to understand what's at stake. This is a 4-year-old child. She has a routine. She has school next week. I'm not blowing up her stability because you have a week to sort something out. I'm asking you to be careful. Not to blow anything up, just aware. Don't go anywhere irregular. Don't—" "Adrian?" Her voice cracked just slightly at the edge. "I have been careful for 4 years. By myself. I know how to be careful." He looked at her. He had told himself he was coming here to keep her informed, to be transparent, to be the opposite of what he had been 4 years ago, when he had made every significant decision unilaterally and in private and called it protecting her. But standing in this hallway, in the quiet of her building at 10 o'clock at night with her daughter asleep 20 feet away, he understood that transparency had its own kind of violence, that arriving here with this information, in this form, on this night, was still a unilateral act. He had made the decision to tell her. He had made the decision to come here. He had made the decision about what she needed to know and when. He had not asked her. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. A small, complicated movement. Not forgiveness. Not warmth. but acknowledgement. Just fix it, she said. Whatever you have to do, fix it. And then we can figure out the rest. He nodded. She reached out and touched his arm briefly, through his coat, barely there, a single second of contact, and then stepped back and put her hand on the apartment door handle. Go home, she said. Get some sleep. You look terrible. He almost laughed. Thank you. I mean it. You need to be sharp right now. Don't fall apart on me. He looked at her. I won't. She held his gaze for a moment. The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere inside the apartment, he thought he heard Rosalie shift in her sleep. Some small sound, a murmur. Elena opened the door and went in. He stood in the hall for a moment after it closed. Then he went back out into the cold. Park's office at 6 in the morning had the particular atmosphere of a space that had been professionally inhabited at abnormal hours too many times. The coffee machine already running, no overhead lights, just the desk lamp and the blue glow of computer screens. Park was 52, careful-eyed, and had been Adrian's attorney for 9 years. He had the files on the desk, still sealed. Before we open those, Adrian said, sitting across from him, I need to know if Whitmore's offer is still on the table. Park looked at him steadily. When I last checked, 8 months ago, it was. Check again, today. Park nodded slowly. And if it is? Adrian looked at the sealed files on the desk between them. 6 years of documentation, 11 public officials, 3 judges. Victor Salvatore's personal connection to a man who disappeared in 2019. The mechanism that would end this. The mechanism that could not be undone. Once he handed this to Whitmore, there was no version of events in which Victor Salvatore did not eventually understand exactly who had supplied the information. There was no version in which the men above Victor, the men whose names appeared on very few documents, did not eventually do the same math. He would need Whitmore's protection to be real. Not promised, real. The kind of real that came with specific commitments, documented agreements, federal resources. The kind of real that required Adrian to commit fully, visibly, and permanently to the other side of a line he had been standing beside for 3 years. There was no walking it back. There was no consulting relationship, no negotiated exit, no quiet management of the situation. There was only all of it, every document, every record, every piece of evidence he had spent 3 years accumulating, handed over, completely, to a federal prosecutor with his name on it. If it is, Adrian said, set up the meeting. Park was quiet for a moment. He looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who has understood something fully and is choosing, deliberately, not to say all of it. You know what this starts, Park said. Yes. Once it starts, I know, Daniel. Park picked up his phone. Outside the office window, New York was beginning its gray winter morning. The sky, the specific colorless shade of a city that runs on something other than weather. Taxis moved. A delivery truck backed into a loading bay across the street. Somewhere, a child was probably being walked to school, complaining about the cold, pulling at someone's hand. Adrian sat in the chair across from his attorney and waited for the call to go through. The line he had been standing beside for 3 years was directly in front of him now. He thought about Victor Salvatore saying she's beautiful in that light, terrible voice. He thought about a red coat and dark eyes and a cookie eaten from them. The call took 4 minutes. Park spoke quietly into his phone. Not the office line, his personal cell, the one that didn't route through any switchboard. And Adrian sat across from him and watched the lamp on the desk cast a small circle of yellow light and listened to Park say yes, and understood, and he'll be available, and tomorrow works. And then Park set the phone down and looked at him with an expression that was neither relief nor dread, but something precise and inward. The look of a man who has just helped close a door and is listening to the lock engage. Tomorrow, Park said. 2 p.m. Location is Whitmore's call. He'll text me the address at noon. Adrian nodded. There's a condition, Park said. What condition? He wants everything, not a selection, not a curated package. Everything on those drives, all of it, in full, handed over at the meeting. Park paused. No staged delivery, no partial cooperation pending terms. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, I don't do installment plans. Adrian looked at the sealed files on the desk. Everything. 11 public officials, 3 judges, The financial infrastructure of an organization that had been running for 30 years through 4 presidential administrations and 2 major federal investigations that had failed to find what was sitting in this room. Victor's personal file. All of it. He had built this record carefully over 3 years, in part as insurance, and in part, he could admit this now, in the gray early morning of an office that smelled like coffee and consequence, in part as a kind of confession, a record that he had witnessed it, that he had not been innocent, that somewhere in the architecture of whatever he chose to become, there was a document acknowledging what he had been. Agreed, he said. Park picked up a letter opener from his desk and cut the seal on the first file. They spent 4 hours going through everything. Park read. Adrian confirmed or clarified. Park made notes in his particular shorthand. Compressed, personal, a system he had developed over 30 years of practicing law in situations where explicit documentation was a liability. By 10 in the morning, they had a complete inventory and a preliminary organization structure for the handoff. At 10:15, Adrian's phone rang. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice. On the third ring, he looked at Park, who gave a small, careful nod, and picked up. Mr. Moreau. A voice he didn't recognize. Male, middle-aged, with the flat affect of a man who delivers messages professionally. A mutual friend wanted me to let you know that the timeline has moved up. Adrian said nothing. His eyes went to Park, who had gone very still. The meeting you have scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the voice continued, may not occur as planned. Certain information has come to the attention of certain people regarding your activities this week. The mutual friend's advice is that you move quickly, today, if possible. A pause. That's the message. The line went dead. Adrian set the phone on the desk. Park looked at him. Who was that? Someone who just told me we've been compromised. The word landed in the room and neither of them moved for a moment. How? Park said. I don't know. Adrian stood. The sudden need to move, to think while moving, he controlled it, sat back down, made himself be still because stillness was information too, and right now he needed to think with his full mind and not his adrenaline. The Whitmore contact was through a private channel, 8 months ago. It was. Who knew about it besides you? Park's face went through something, a quick, contained movement, almost like pain. No one. From my end, no one. From Whitmore's end. I can't speak to that. Adrian looked at him, not with suspicion. Park had been loyal for 9 years, and this was not the face of a man who had betrayed him, but with the specific focus of a person trying to reconstruct a leak by tracing every pipe. Call Whitmore, Adrian said. Right now. Tell him the meeting needs to happen today. Park was already picking up his phone. The call lasted 90 seconds. Park's face during those 90 seconds told a story that Adrian read in real time. The initial answer, the pause, the shift in Park's expression from urgent to something harder to classify. When Park put the phone down, his jaw was set in a way that Adrian had seen perhaps twice in 9 years. Whitmore's office says he's unavailable, Park said. His assistant says he's been called into an internal review. Internal review. Effective this morning. The word settled. An internal review, effective this morning, in the same hour that an unknown caller had warned Adrian his timeline was compromised. Whitmore pulled from availability precisely when Adrian needed him most. Not by coincidence, not by accident, but with the specific timing of a coordinated action. Someone got to him, Adrian said, or someone got to someone near him. Same result. Park was quiet. He was thinking. Adrian could see it, the attorney's brain running through implications and contingencies with the methodical speed of someone who had spent a career staying slightly ahead of catastrophe. There are other prosecutors, Park said. Not like Whitmore. Not ones already briefed on the existence of the material, already willing to move. Adrian's voice was controlled. Flat. He was not going to let the anger surface here because the anger was not useful here. Starting over with someone new takes months. We don't have months. We have... He stopped. He checked his watch. Victor had given him a week. The call this morning suggested that courtesy was already eroding. We have days, Adrian said. Maybe less. Park looked at the organized files spread across his desk. 30 years of criminal infrastructure, meticulously documented, currently sitting in a law office in Lower Manhattan with no clear destination. There are other channels, Park said carefully, not federal prosecutors. His phone rang. Park looked at the screen. His expression changed, something specific and alarmed passing quickly across it before he controlled it. "Who is it?" Adrian said. Park turned the phone so Adrian could see the screen. The number was Adrian's own, his personal cell number, calling Park's personal cell. Adrian looked at his phone, face up on the desk. It was not making a call. It was sitting dark and silent. Park answered. The voice that came through was not a voice Adrian knew. It was young, younger than he expected, and calm with the specific calibrated calm of someone reading from something. "Mr. Park, please tell Mr. Moreau that we have his phone, the one he left in the Escalade last night while he walked to Osteria Nera." A pause. "We've had it since approximately 9:15 p.m. We thought it was courteous to return it this way rather than other ways." Park held the phone toward Adrian. Adrian took it. The young, calm voice said, "The offer from Mr. Salvatore stands through midnight tonight. After midnight, the photograph of the woman and child goes to a specific individual whose relationship to the woman and child we understand Mr. Moreau would prefer remained uncomplicated." Another pause. "The drives Mr. Park has been organizing this morning are also of interest. Mr. Salvatore would consider their voluntary return to be a gesture of good faith." Adrian said, "Put Victor on. Mr. Salvatore is unavailable. Tell him to make himself available." "Mr. Moreau, tell him," Adrian said, "that I will not have this conversation with a relay. He wants something from me. He looks me in the eye and asks for it. That's always been how we've worked. Tell him that." A silence. Long enough that Adrian thought the line might have gone dead. Then, 1 hour, Mr. Salvatore will call this number." The call ended. Adrian handed Park's phone back to him. Park set it on the desk and looked at Adrian with an expression that was, for the first time in 9 years of representing some of the more complicated matters Adrian had brought him, close to afraid. "They've had your phone since last night," Park said. "Yes. Everything on it is encrypted." Adrian said it steadily. "Strong encryption. Getting through it would take resources and time they don't necessarily have." He paused. "But they don't need what's on it. They have enough without it." The photograph. The photograph. Park was quiet for a moment. Adrian. The person they mentioned, whose relationship to Elena and Rosalie they want to keep uncomplicated. He chose his words with visible care. Who are they referring to? Adrian looked at the desk. He had not told Park about the photographs. He had not, until this moment, fully traced the specific threat Victor's people were making. Not just "we have a photograph of your daughter," but the secondary implication, the more surgical one, the photograph going to a specific individual. He had been so focused on the federal angle that he had not thought carefully enough about who else might be weaponized. "Elena's family," he said slowly. "Her father." Park waited. Martin Hartwell. Adrian said the name with the flat weight of someone placing an object on a table. "Elena's father. Retired. He doesn't know I exist. He doesn't know Rosalie's father is anyone other than a man who wasn't able to be present. Elena protected that story carefully." He paused. If someone sent Martin Hartwell a photograph of his granddaughter standing with a man he could research, and that research led back to it would destroy Elena's relationship with her father. It would destroy more than that. Adrian's jaw was tight. Martin Hartwell had a son, Elena's brother Kevin. Kevin died 8 years ago, drug-related. He kept his voice even. Martin has spent the last 8 years with a specific and consuming contempt for anyone connected to organized crime in any capacity. It's not a moderate position. Elena has managed, carefully, to keep her life separate from that part of her history because she knew, because I told her, when we were together, enough about my background that a connection would. He stopped. The full shape of it arrived. Victor didn't just have a photograph of Elena and Rosalie on a sidewalk. Victor had the thread. The single thread that, pulled, would unravel the careful separation Elena had built between the man she had loved and the life she had constructed around protecting her daughter from what that man had been. "He's not going to her," Adrian said. He's going to her father, because her father is the one who would take the photograph and make it into something that destroys her family from inside. Park understood. Adrian could see it. How long has Victor known about the father? Park said. I don't know. Adrian was doing math, quick and unpleasant. Since Christmas Eve, at minimum, if his nephew ran a standard background check after photographing them, more likely he stopped again. More likely Victor had known for longer. Had known possibly that Adrian had been in contact with Elena before Christmas Eve, had prepared this specific pressure point in advance, which meant the casual warmth of Osteria Nera, the generous week's timeline, the consulting relationship framed as a reasonable ask. All of it had been performance. Victor had walked into that restaurant already holding the knife. He had simply been offering Adrian the chance to agree before using it. Adrian stood up. Where are you going? Park said. I need to call Elena. Adrian, I need to warn her before Victor's people do something I can't reverse. He was already moving toward the door. Stay by your phone. When Victor calls this number in 1 hour, you answer it. Keep him talking as long as you can. What do I say to him? Tell him I'm considering the terms. Tell him I need more specifics about the consulting arrangement. Ask questions. Use every minute. And where will you actually be? Adrian was at the door. He looked back at Park, his attorney, his confidant, the man who had handled the legal infrastructure of his life for nearly a decade and was now sitting behind a desk covered in documents that could bring down a 30-year criminal organization and had just watched the mechanism for delivering them safely evaporate in the space of 40 minutes. I'll be fixing the part of this I should have fixed before it became a threat, Adrian said. He walked out. Elena answered on the second ring. I need you to listen to me, Adrian said. He was moving through the building lobby, phone at his ear, heading for the street. Don't go to your father today. A beat. What? Martin, don't call him, don't go see him, and if he calls you... Adrian pushed through the lobby door into the cold. Don't answer, not until I call you back. Adrian, what's happening? Victor Salvatore has a photograph of you and Rosalie from Christmas Eve. He said it directly because there was no version of this that benefited from softening. I believe he also knows about your father, about Kevin, about the specific way that information delivered to your father would... He heard her breath change. He wouldn't, she said. The words came out stripped of everything except the bare statement. Adrian, he would. I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. He was on the sidewalk now, cold air hitting his face, and the apology felt entirely inadequate, and he offered it anyway because she deserved to hear it, even if it couldn't fix what it was trying to address. I'm going to fix this before it goes further. I need today. Rosalie starts back at preschool tomorrow, Elena said. Her voice had gone very quiet. I can't... Adrian, I cannot have my daughter's life. I know. He flagged a cab. Thomas was at the penthouse. There was no time to wait. I know. 1 day. Give me 1 day. And in the meantime, if anything feels wrong, if anyone comes to your building, anyone you don't know, you take Rosalie and you go to Kara's. You told me last night that wasn't necessary. I was wrong last night. A silence. I hate this, she said, quiet and raw and absolutely true. I know you do. I hate that I'm back inside something I spent 4 years making sure she would never be inside. I know. He got into the cab, gave the driver his penthouse address. Elena, I'm going to end this today. Not tomorrow. Today. Another silence. Longer. My father cannot find out this way, she said finally. He cannot find out from a photograph sent by someone like Salvatore. Do you understand what that would do to him? To us? I understand. If he finds out that Rosalie's father is... She stopped. That her father was connected to the kind of people who... Her voice cracked, barely, at the very edge. My brother, Adrian. I know about Kevin. Then you know what this would... I will not let that happen, he said. I promise you, I will not let that happen. He almost never made promises. He had learned early that promises were liabilities, statements that could be audited, that created obligations and expectations and surface area for failure. He had spent his adult life speaking in terms of intentions and plans and likely outcomes. He made the promise because it was the truth, because whatever it cost him, this particular thing was not going to happen. Elena's father was not going to receive that photograph. Martin Hartwell was not going to have his grief weaponized by Victor Salvatore. He would burn down everything else first. The penthouse felt different in the middle of the day. He moved through it quickly, straight to the study, the locked cabinet behind the desk, the secondary safe that Daniel Park had never been in because it contained materials that predated their professional relationship. Things Adrian had held on to not for leverage, but for a reason he had never examined too carefully. Insurance. Against himself, partly. Against the possibility that someday he would need to demonstrate clearly and irrefutably that he had never been at the top of the thing he had been part of, that there were names above his, decisions above his. He had 6 files. 2 of them were about Victor Salvatore specifically, not the network, not the wider organization, but Victor himself. Victor's personal finances, Victor's direct communications, Victor's connection to the union official from 2019, the private Delaware filing. 4 of them were about the men above Victor. He had never intended to use the 4. He sat at his desk and looked at them for exactly 30 seconds. His phone rang. Park. He called early, Park said. There was something in his voice, tight, compressed, the sound of a man managing something he had not expected to be managing. He didn't want to negotiate terms. He wanted to tell me something. What? He knows about the Delaware filing. Adrian went very still. The private legal firm, Park said. In Delaware, the sealed record. He named it specifically. He said, Park paused. Adrian could hear him reading something. He said, tell Adrian that the thing he thought was buried is the most exposed thing he owns. The Delaware filing, private, filed 18 months ago, held by a firm he had used once, specifically because they had no other connection to him. Used once, 18 months ago. Adrian set his hand flat on the desk, pressed until he could feel the edge of the wood against his palm. Daniel, he said. His voice was level, very level, the specific levelness of a man putting enormous pressure on something in order to keep it from moving. Who drew up the Delaware filing? Park was quiet for 3 seconds. I don't know. You handled that one independently. I used a firm called Reiser and Crane, Lower Manhattan. I used them because they had no connection to you, to me, or to any of the other... He stopped. Reiser and Crane. He had been referred to Reiser and Crane by an intermediary, a business contact who had used them for a delicate personal matter and recommended them for exactly the quality Adrian needed. Discreet, independent, no existing relationship with either side. The intermediary's name was Gerald Foss. Gerald Foss, who had been Adrian's point of contact for a logistics company he'd acquired 18 months ago. Gerald Foss, who had left the company 6 months after the acquisition in what had been framed as a mutual parting. Gerald Foss, whose name appeared in 2 of Adrian's network-era financial records as a secondary recipient. Gerald Foss, who had recommended Reiser and Crane. The leak is 18 months old, Adrian said. Park said nothing. He's had a man inside my operation for 18 months. Possibly longer. Adrian stood. His body needed to move and he let it, pacing to the window and back. He let me run the Whitmore contact, let me build the case, let me think I was 3 steps ahead while he was watching every move. He pressed the heel of his hand against the edge of the desk. The week he gave me wasn't generosity. It was theater. He doesn't need the week. He's had everything he needed for... His phone buzzed. A text. Elena's number. Someone just buzzed my apartment. I don't know who it is. Rosalie is here. Adrian read it once and was already moving toward the door when the second text arrived. The buzzer message was just one word. It said, Kevin. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Kevin. Elena's dead brother's name. Delivered to her door buzzer, to her specifically, as a single word. Not a threat. Not an explanation. Just a name. The name of a wound. Victor wasn't waiting for midnight. Victor wasn't waiting for anything. The files were on the desk. The drives were at Park's office. Whitmore was locked in an internal review. The Delaware filing was compromised. The timeline was gone. The federal channel was gone. And somewhere across Brooklyn, a woman was standing in her apartment looking at a buzzer screen with her daughter beside her. and a dead brother's name. He was in the elevator before he finished reading the second text. The penthouse elevator took 40 seconds to reach the lobby. He counted them. His coat was in his hand rather than on his body because there had been no time to put it on properly, and he was not going to stand still long enough to do it now. The files, the 4 files, the ones about the men above Victor, were in the interior pocket of his jacket, folded once, thick against his ribs. He had made a decision in the space between reading Elena's text and reaching the elevator door. The decision was this: he was not going to manage this anymore. 3 years of careful management, 3 years of methodical separation, clean exits, documented records, federal channels, backup contingencies. 3 years of operating like a man who believed that the right combination of preparation and patience could engineer his way out of something he had walked into voluntarily. Victor had watched all of it, had let him build every layer of the structure, and then, at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability, Elena and Rosalie identified, Whitmore neutralized, the Delaware filing exposed, had sent a single word to a buzzer panel in Brooklyn. Kevin, not a threat, a demonstration. I know exactly where to cut. The elevator hit the lobby. He was through the door before it fully opened. Thomas was not at the building. Adrian had sent him home at midnight, and there were no cabs on the block, which meant Adrian walked fast toward the avenue, phone to his ear, calling Elena with one hand and flagging traffic with the other. She answered immediately. "Don't open the door," he said. "Don't answer the buzzer again. Is Rosalie?" "She's in her room. She doesn't know anything is wrong." Elena's voice was controlled in the way that people are controlled when controlling themselves is the only useful thing left. "I told her I was doing grown-up phone stuff, and she's watching her show." "Good. Good." He got his coat on one arm, then the other, phone wedged between his ear and shoulder. "Has anyone knocked on the actual door?" "No, just the buzzer. If that changes, if anyone comes to the door, you call 911 first. Not me. 911. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Elena." He found a cab, got in, gave her address. "I'm coming to you, 20 minutes. What are you going to do when you get here?" "I'm going to get you somewhere safe, and then I'm going to end this." A pause. Short. "You keep saying that." "This time I mean it differently." He could hear her breathing, could hear the television in Rosalie's room, a thin ribbon of sound through the wall. Some bright, uncomplicated cartoon world running on schedule, while the actual world outside the door stood at its worst angle. 20 minutes, she said. 18, he said, and told the driver to run the next light. He called Park from the cab. "Victor's people are at Elena's building," he said. "The buzzer." They used her brother's name. Park made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Adrian, I need you to do something for me. Right now, before anything else." He kept his voice low, close to the phone, his body angled away from the driver out of habit. "The 4 files on my desk, not the 2 about Victor, the 4 about the men above him. I need you to photograph every page, every single page, high resolution. Then I need you to email those photographs to 3 addresses." He recited them from memory. 2 journalists, 1 a domestic investigative reporter he had never contacted, 1 an international correspondent he had also never contacted, and a 3rd address that was a dead drop he had set up 2 years ago and never used. Subject line on all 3, for publication, hold until contact. "Bon seat. Adrian," Park's voice was careful. If you send those, it goes nowhere until I make contact with each of those addresses and release them. But if something happens to me in the next few hours, if I stop being reachable, they publish." He watched the Brooklyn streets move past the cab window. "Victor needs to understand that burning me down doesn't clean anything up. It makes it worse. Everything goes to light." A silence. "You're using it as a dead man's switch," Park said. "I'm using it as the only leverage I have left. He'll know what you've done." "That's the point. He needs to know." Adrian's jaw was tight. "Make the call, Daniel. Then I need you to call Victor directly. Use the number his people called you from this morning. Tell him I want a meeting, tonight. My location." "He won't come to your location. He will when you tell him what I just had you send." A beat. And tell him to come alone. If he brings people, I bring journalists. Park was quiet for 3 seconds. You're betting everything on him valuing his own exposure over the pressure he's putting on you. I'm betting that the men above Victor value their exposure more than Victor values winning this particular argument. Adrian looked out the window. Elena's building was 2 blocks away. Victor is not the ceiling of this organization. He knows that. The men above him have a great deal more to lose from a media release than Victor does from me refusing to cooperate. And if I'm wrong, then we find out. He paid the driver, got out. Send the emails, Daniel, then make the call. He went inside. Elena opened the door before he knocked. She had been watching through the peephole. He could tell from the speed of it. The door pulled back immediately, her face in the gap before the chain was off. She looked at him with the specific expression of a person who has been holding something very tightly and is calculating whether it is safe yet to adjust their grip. It wasn't safe yet, but she let him in. The apartment was warm and small and completely, painfully normal. A child's drawing on the refrigerator, a half-drunk cup of tea on the counter, the smell of whatever Rosalie had eaten for breakfast still in the air. The television in the back room was still going. A cartoon voice saying something cheerful about something that didn't matter. She doesn't know, Elena said, quietly. A confirmation more than a question. No. She crossed her arms over her chest. Not defensive. More like she was holding herself together from the outside. What's the plan? He told her. The dead man's switch, the emails, the meeting with Victor. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she stood very still for a moment. You're going to meet him, she said. Tonight. And you believe that having sent those files to journalists creates enough risk for the people above him that Victor will back down. Yes. You believe that? I do. She looked at him. The look she gave him was not the look of a woman asking him to reconsider. It was harder than that. It was the look of a woman conducting a very fast, very thorough assessment of whether the man in front of her was operating from calculation or from desperation, and whether she could tell the difference. Where do you want us to go? She said. He exhaled. Kara's. She's in New Jersey. I know. I'll drive you. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once, turned toward Rosalie's room. He stood in her kitchen and listened to her tell Rosalie, in a voice so steady it was almost inhuman, that they were going to go see Aunt Kara for a sleepover, which was exciting, wasn't it? And yes, she could bring the stuffed rabbit. And yes, she could bring the other one too. And no, they weren't going in pajamas. Let's find your shoes. Rosalie's response to this was immediate and uncomplicated enthusiasm. Adrian stood in the kitchen and listened to his daughter be happy about something and stared at the drawing on the refrigerator. A figure with a large circular head and stick arms that might have been a person or might have been a son, signed at the bottom in large, uneven letters that spelled Rosalie. And felt something move through him that had no name he'd ever used. He took out his phone. Texted Park. Emails sent? Park. Sent. Victor's people are calling me back. Adrian, tell them tonight. My terms. He put the phone away. Rosalie came out of the back room with a rabbit under each arm and wearing one shoe. She looked at Adrian with the frank, unsurprised directness of a 4-year-old who had apparently decided at their first meeting that he was acceptable and had not revised this position. You have 2 shoes, she told him. I only have 1. That's true, he said. Mama's finding the other one. Smart plan. She studied him for a moment. Are you coming to Aunt Kara's? Not tonight. She appeared to process this. That's okay, she said generously. Aunt Kara has a dog. His name is Biscuit. He's not very big. Sounds like a good dog. He barks at the mailman. She paused. Mama says it's because he doesn't know the mailman isn't dangerous. But I think maybe Biscuit just likes to bark. Adrian crouched down to her level, the files pressed against his ribs. His phone was in his pocket. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Park was negotiating the terms of a meeting that could go badly in 6 ways he had already mapped, and 2 or 3 he hadn't thought of yet. Rosalie, he said. She looked at him with those eyes that were his eyes in someone else's face. Have a good time at Aunt Kara's, he said. Look after your mama. She took this charge seriously. He could see it register. The squaring of small shoulders, the adjustment of grip on both rabbits. "Okay," she said. "I will." Elena appeared with the second shoe in a bag. She looked at Adrian crouched in front of Rosalie, and something crossed her face that she smoothed away quickly. She helped Rosalie with the shoe and then straightened and met his eyes. "Ready?" she said. He drove them to Kara's himself, in a rental car Park had arranged. Nothing traceable to Adrian, nothing connected to Thomas or the usual vehicles. 40 minutes through tunnel traffic, Rosalie asleep in the back seat before they crossed into New Jersey, both rabbits under her chin. Elena sat in the passenger seat and watched the road and didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. When she did speak, her voice was quiet enough that Rosalie couldn't have heard even if she'd been awake. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "The files you sent to those journalists, the 4 about the men above Salvatore." She kept her eyes on the road. "Are your name in them?" He kept his eyes on the road too. "Yes." "In what capacity?" "As a participant. In the earlier years." He paused. "It's documented honestly. I was part of the network. I moved money through it. I used its infrastructure. I benefited from it. The files don't pretend otherwise." She was quiet. "If those files are ever released," she said carefully, "publicly, my name is in the public record." "Yes." He changed lanes. "The Vail deal gets complicated. Some other things get complicated. My attorneys will have work to do." He kept his voice level. "It's not a clean outcome for me personally. But you sent them anyway." Victor had to believe that I was willing to burn myself down along with him. If I'd only sent the files that implicated other people, he'd know I was protecting myself. This way, he paused. This way he knows I've already accepted what it costs. Elena said nothing for a long time. The New Jersey suburbs moved past the windows. Quiet streets, lit houses, the ordinary Saturday night geography of people living lives that had nothing to do with any of this. "You're different," she said, same words she'd used in the cafe. "Different weight behind them now." He said nothing. 4 years ago, you would not have sent those files, she said. You would have found another angle, something that protected your position. You would have managed it. She looked at him. He could feel her looking even with his eyes on the road. You managed everything. I know. What changed? He thought about a red coat on a Christmas Eve sidewalk, about dark eyes catching snow, about a little girl who had already decided to look after her mama before she'd been asked, who organized her priorities with the clear, uncomplicated conviction of someone who had not yet learned to be ashamed of what she loved. I figured out what I was managing everything for, so, he said. Elena held his gaze for a moment. He could feel it, and then looked back at the road. Kara met them at the door. She looked at Adrian with the specific expression of a woman who had spent 4 years watching her sister carry something heavy and had strong opinions about the person responsible. She took Rosalie, sleeping, from the back seat without looking at him again. At the door, Elena turned back. Adrian. She kept her voice low. Kara was inside, out of earshot. I know, he said. Come back. 2 words. Simple. She said them the way you say things you've decided not to dress up. I will, he said. She went inside. He stood on Kara's front step for 3 seconds. Cold air, quiet street, the weight of the files against his ribs. His phone buzzed. Park. Victor agreed. Midnight, he's proposing the Harbor restaurant, the private one, the same location. Victor returning them to the scene of the first meeting. Deliberately, Adrian understood. As a statement. This ends where it started. On my terms. Adrian typed back. Confirmed. I'll be there. He walked to the car. He had 3 hours. He drove back through the tunnel and spent 40 minutes with Park going over the architecture of what came next. The journalists had the files. The dead man's switch was live. Victor knew it. What Adrian needed now was the meeting to function as an endpoint rather than an escalation. And that required Victor to walk in believing that the cost of continuing to pressure Adrian exceeded the benefit of whatever cooperation he was demanding. The math had to be right. Park walked him through it twice. The exposure in the 4 files was significant, not just for Victor, but for the men above him. men who had maintained political and financial legitimacy for decades and whose entire operation depended on never appearing in a headline. Victor could absorb a great deal. The men above Victor could not absorb a journalist with 4 files full of documented transactions and cross-reference political connections. "He's going to push back," Park said. "He's going to tell you the switch is a bluff, that you won't release files that expose yourself." And I tell him he's right. I won't release them unless he gives me a reason to. And the reason is anything other than complete withdrawal. Complete withdrawal and a guarantee. Adrian sat across from Park's desk for the last time tonight. Victor calls whoever buzzed Elena's building and tells them it's done. Tonight, in front of me. Park looked at him. He won't like that. I know. You're asking him to demonstrate compliance in real time. That's a humiliation. That's the point. Adrian held Park's gaze. Victor has spent this entire week running scenarios in which I am negotiating from fear. I need him to understand, in the room, that I'm not. The only language that registers with Victor is when the other person has genuinely stopped caring about their own loss. He stood. He's going to look at me tonight and try to find the thing I'm protecting, the thing I won't sacrifice. When he doesn't find it, he picked up his coat. That's when we'll be done. Park was quiet for a moment. And if he decides that losing the fight is less acceptable than the exposure cost, then the journalists have what they have and we see what happens. That's a significant risk, Adrian. Yes. He buttoned his coat. But it's my risk, not Elena's, not Rosalie's. He looked at Park. That's the difference. He left. Osteria Nera at midnight was quieter than it had been 2 nights before. Same vestibule, same 2 men, though different ones. He didn't recognize either face, which meant Victor had rotated his people, which meant Victor had been more careful about this meeting than the first one. The check was faster, more thorough. He had left the files with Park. He came in clean. The main room, same candles, same table, same Barolo, breathing in its decanter, which Adrian thought was an interesting choice. Optimism, or habit, or simply a man who disliked drinking alone. Victor was already there, but he was not alone. Standing to his left, slightly behind him, was a man Adrian recognized and had not expected to see here. Not one of Victor's operational people, not a lawyer or a representative. A man named Conti, Renard Conti, who did not, technically, work for Victor Salvatore at all. Who occupied a tier above Victor in the organizational structure, whose name appeared in one of the 4 files, and whose presence at this table indicated that the people above Victor were not waiting for a report from the meeting. They were in the meeting. Adrian stopped 3 feet from the table. "Victor," he said. "Sit down, Adrian." Victor's voice had lost the warmth. The performance was over. "You know Renard." "I know who he is." Conti said nothing. He was 68 years old and entirely unremarkable in appearance. Medium height, gray suit, the face of a man who had long since understood that power operated best when it looked like nothing at all. His hands were folded on the table. He was watching Adrian with the patient attention of a man who has already decided how this ends and is simply waiting for the proceedings to confirm it. "You sent some files this evening," Conti said. His voice was quiet, measured. The voice of a man who had not raised it in decades because raising it had never been necessary. "To 3 addresses." "I did. Photographers, journalists." He paused. "That was a meaningful escalation." "It was a response to a meaningful escalation," Adrian said. Conti looked at him for a moment. "The woman's building. That was Victor's initiative. I won't pretend otherwise." He glanced at Victor, brief, cool, the glance of a superior acknowledging an employee's error without pardoning it. "It was unnecessary. You'd already accepted the meeting." "It wasn't about the meeting," Adrian said. "It was about showing me the cost of refusing." "Yes." Conti nodded slowly. "Which brings us here." He looked at Adrian with those patient, unremarkable eyes. "You've built something significant. The Veil deal, the infrastructure acquisition. Legitimate, clean, the kind of thing that gets written about in the financial press." A pause. "We don't want to damage that." "Then don't." "The concern," Conti said, as though Adrian hadn't spoken, "is not about what you've built. It's about what you know, and more specifically about what you might, in certain circumstances, feel compelled to do with what you know. He leaned forward very slightly. The files you sent tonight represent one version of those circumstances. We'd like to understand what other versions exist. Adrian looked at him. There are no other versions. The files go nowhere if you go nowhere. That's the entire arrangement. The arrangement as you've constructed it, Conti said, requires us to trust your long-term judgment, your long-term stability. He folded his hands more tightly. The woman complicates that. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it. Conti's voice was still entirely level. A man with no attachments is a known quantity. A man with a child he paused, with a family forming. That man's calculus can change. Under pressure, under grief, he may make decisions he wouldn't otherwise make. He looked at Adrian steadily. We've seen it before. The candle between them burned without moving. The restaurant was absolutely silent. What are you saying? Adrian said. Not because he didn't know, because he needed to hear Conti say it directly. I'm saying that the arrangement you're proposing, help us, leave us alone and we leave you alone, is sustainable only if we can be confident that the variables in your life remain stable. Conti held his gaze. The woman. The child. Those are new variables. We don't know them. We don't know how they affect your decision-making. So what do you want? Conti was quiet for a moment. We want oversight, he said. Not operational involvement, not the consulting arrangement Victor described. Simply awareness of significant decisions, of changes in your circumstances. He spread his hand slightly. Think of it as an ongoing relationship, low maintenance, primarily passive. The word passive sat in the room and meant nothing of the kind. Adrian looked at the man across from him, looked at Victor, who had not spoken since the introduction, and who was watching this exchange with the careful blankness of a man who has been partially sidelined from his own meeting and is managing his reaction to it. He thought about Elena at Kara's door saying, "Come back." He thought about Rosalie with 2 rabbits under her chin, asleep in the back of a car, utterly unaware that the world had spent the last 36 hours attempting to use her as a pressure point against a man she didn't know was her father. He thought about what Park had said. You're betting that the men above Victor value their exposure more than Victor values winning. Conti was one of those men, and Conti was here, in person, which meant the exposure in those 4 files had registered exactly as hard as Adrian had calculated it would, which meant Conti was negotiating, which meant Conti was already at the table Adrian had needed him at. Adrian reached into his jacket. Both men across from him went slightly rigid. Victor's hand moved toward the table edge. One of the men near the wall shifted, and Adrian produced slowly and with deliberate visibility, not a weapon, but a phone. His phone. He laid it on the table face up. Call whoever you sent to Elena Hartwell's building, he said. Tell them it's over. Tell them to leave the neighborhood and not return. He held Conti's gaze. Do that now, in front of me, and I'll tell you what the actual arrangement is. Conti looked at the phone, looked at Adrian. Something moved in the older man's face, not anger, not quite. Something more like the recalibration of a man encountering a pressure point he hadn't expected to encounter. The recognition that the variable he'd been reading as manageable had just demonstrated that it wasn't. Victor started to say something. Renard, Adrian said, looking only at Conti. You came here because the files exist. You came because your name is in them. You came because you'd rather close this quietly than have a journalist making calls. He leaned forward. I'm offering you quiet. But quiet doesn't look like oversight. Quiet doesn't look like ongoing relationships and passive awareness. He pushed the phone 2 inches toward Conti. Quiet looks like a phone call, right now. And then we discuss the only terms I have. The restaurant was completely silent. Conti looked at the phone on the table between them, looked at Adrian, and reached. Conti picked up the phone. Not his own phone, Adrian's, from the table. He looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something he has calculated the weight of and found acceptable. Then he took out his own phone, dialed a number from memory, and held it to his ear. The call lasted 40 seconds. Adrian watched Conti's face during those 40 seconds, with the complete unblinking attention of a man who has placed everything he has on a single number and is watching the wheel turn. Conti spoke quietly. 3 sentences, a pause, 2 more. And his expression throughout was the expression of a man giving an instruction he had given many times before and expected to be followed without elaboration. He ended the call, set his phone on the table beside Adrian's. "Done," he said. Adrian held his gaze for 3 full seconds, measuring. Then he picked up his own phone and texted Park. "Check on Elena. Make sure it's clear." He set the phone face up on the table so both men could see when Park's response arrived. Victor shifted in his chair. "You're checking?" "Yes." "You don't trust my word." "I trust Renard's word," Adrian said. "I'm verifying it anyway." Something crossed Victor's face. Not anger. Something older and more complicated. The expression of a man watching a version of himself operate with a precision he recognized and found, in this specific context, deeply unwelcome. They waited. Park's text came in 90 seconds. "Car outside her building is gone. Checked with the building super. He confirmed 2 men left approximately 10 minutes ago. Elena confirmed no further contact." Adrian read it, slid the phone across the table so Conti could see the screen. Conti read it, nodded once. "Now," Adrian said. "The terms." He laid it out without theater and without warmth. The 4 files remained with the journalists, held under the dead man's switch protocol. As long as Adrian remained uncontacted, unharassed, and undamaged, and as long as Elena Hartwell and Rosalie Hartwell remained the same, those files stayed sealed. Permanently. He had no interest in publishing them, no interest in cooperating with federal investigators, no interest in ever referencing any of this again in any context. He wanted his exit to be final and clean and invisible. In return, complete severance. No consulting arrangements, no oversight, no ongoing relationships of any kind. No contact with him, with Elena, with anyone connected to either of them. If Victor Salvatore or anyone in this organization needed something from Adrian Moreau going forward, the answer was no, and the question should not be asked. "The Delaware filing," Adrian said. "The sealed record about the union official. I withdraw it from the legal firm and it comes to you directly, in exchange for written confirmation, signed by Renard, that this arrangement is final and permanent." Conti had been listening with his hands flat on the table and his face entirely still. "Written confirmation," he said. "You understand what you're asking me to put my name on." "I understand exactly what I'm asking." Adrian held his gaze. "You understand exactly why I need it." A silence. "The written confirmation doesn't leave this room," Conti said. "It leaves with me. It stays secured. Same function as the files. It goes nowhere unless someone gives it a reason to." Conti looked at him for a long time. The candles had burned lower. The light in the room had changed, gone slightly warmer and more unsteady. Victor had not spoken in 20 minutes and was looking at the table with the expression of a man who has watched his own meeting become someone else's and is processing the implications of that. "You've thought about this carefully," Conti said. "I had 3 years to think about it. And the Whitmore channel? Dead, I have no intention of reviving it. The internal review on Whitmore." Conti paused delicately. "That can be resolved, if we have an arrangement." Adrian looked at him. "I don't need Whitmore if we have an arrangement." "No, you don't." Conti was quiet for a moment. "But you needed him 2 days ago, before you decided to take a different approach." 2 days ago, I was trying to solve this cleanly through legitimate channels." Adrian's voice was even. "You made that impossible." "Victor made that impossible," Conti said. Again that brief, cool glance at Victor. "The Whitmore contact was an error in judgment on several levels." He paused. "I'm saying it can be undone. If you'd prefer the legitimate channel, complete cooperation with Whitmore, full evidentiary handover, federal protection for yourself and your family, I won't stand in the way of that." Adrian went still. The offer was real. He could see it was real. Conti was too careful to bluff at this specific moment, when the files existed and the dead man's switch was live, and Adrian had already demonstrated a willingness to absorb personal cost. Conti was offering him the exit he had originally wanted, the clean federal conclusion, because Conti had done the math and understood that the exposure in those 4 files was significant enough that a controlled arrangement with Adrian was preferable to an uncontrolled investigation. Both paths led to the same destination. Adrian out, the files sealed, the organization intact. The federal path was cleaner, more permanent, harder to walk back. The private arrangement was faster, less public, required trusting a document signed by a man whose word was worth exactly as much as his continued self-interest. Adrian looked at the candle between them. Thought about Park saying once it starts, you can't stop it. Thought about what a federal cooperation process actually looked like. The months, the depositions, the visibility, the way it would move through every corner of his life and Elena's life and eventually, in some form, into the public record where anyone could find it. Where Rosalie could find it someday. Where Martin Hartwell could find it. Thought about Elena at Kara's door. Come back. The private arrangement, Adrian said, with the written confirmation. Tonight. Conti nodded. Once final. He produced a pen from his interior jacket pocket, a physical pen, which Adrian recognized as a statement. A man who still signed things by hand was a man who understood the weight of signatures. And he looked at Adrian and said, "Draft the language." Adrian took the pen. He wrote it on the back of the restaurant's printed menu because there was no other paper on the table, and because, in another world, this would be almost funny. 6 sentences. Specific, unambiguous, naming Conti by full name and title, naming the organization in language that was precise without being legally actionable, stating the terms of the permanent severance, stating the condition of the Delaware filings transfer, stating that violation of these terms released Adrian from any obligation regarding the sealed files held under Dead Man's Switch protocol. He pushed it across the table. Conti read it again, signed it. Adrian folded the menu page twice and put it in his coat's inner pocket, against the left side of his chest, directly over his heart, which he was aware was the kind of detail a person noticed and then spent a long time not knowing what to do with. The Delaware filing, Conti said, within 48 hours. Park will arrange the transfer. Conti stood. Victor stood. The 2 men near the wall moved toward the door. Conti looked at Adrian one final time. There was something in the look, not respect exactly, and not contempt, and not the warmth that Victor had always performed. Something more neutral than any of those things. The look of a man who has encountered a variable he underestimated and is filing the information away. The girl, Conti said. Not a threat, just words. Whatever she becomes, she has your eyes. He walked out. Victor followed without speaking. Adrian stood alone in the restaurant with the lower burning candles and the untouched Barolo and the particular silence of a room that has just held something significant and is now simply a room again. He stood there for a moment. Then he sat down. He did not drink the wine. He sat in the chair and breathed and let the silence run until his hands were completely still and his pulse was something close to normal, and the thing in his chest that had been running at maximum compression for 72 hours began, incrementally, to loosen. He thought about calling Elena. He didn't. It was 2 a.m. and she needed sleep and Rosalie needed sleep and the news could wait 4 hours. It would still be true in 4 hours. He called Park instead. 3 sentences. It's done. Arrange the Delaware transfer tomorrow. Go home. Park said, "Are you all right?" Adrian thought about the question, considered it with the seriousness it deserved. "Not yet," he said, "but I will be." He walked out of Osteria Nera into the cold, and this time, when the winter air hit him, it felt like something he had earned rather than something happening to him, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the harbor, and then started walking north. What? He called Elena at 6:30 in the morning. She answered on the first ring. She had not been sleeping. He could tell from the immediacy of it, from the quality of her voice, awake and waiting rather than pulled from something. "It's done," he said. A silence. Long enough that he counted it. 4 seconds. "Done," she said. "Completely, permanently." He was sitting on a bench near the waterfront, the city starting its gray winter morning around him, the sky lightening at the edges in the way it did in January, reluctantly, like something that didn't entirely want to happen. "Victor's people are gone from your neighborhood. They won't be back. I have written documentation of the agreement." He paused. "It's over, Elena." Another silence. Different quality. Processing rather than waiting. "Rosalie's been awake since 5, she said. She and Biscuit have reached an agreement about the ottoman." Something moved through him. Not quite a laugh, something quieter and more fundamental than a laugh. "Is Kara angry?" he said. Kara is drinking her second coffee and pretending she's not crying. A pause. She's not angry. She says she needs to revise her opinion of you. She didn't say in which direction. Fair. Adrian? Her voice changed, dropped. The particular register she used when she was saying something she had decided to stop qualifying. You signed documents that put your own name in them. The files you sent to those journalists. It's managed. Park will handle the cleanup. He watched a tugboat move on the water. Some things are going to be complicated for a while. Legally, financially. I've been through complicated before. This is different. Yes, he said. It is. He let that sit. But it's done. And it's... He paused. Elena, it's the right kind of complicated. Do you understand what I mean? There's the kind of complicated that's the cost of doing something wrong. And then there's the kind that's the cost of doing something right, late. He paused again. This is the second kind. She was quiet. Bring Rosalie home today, he said. Let her go to preschool tomorrow. Let everything go back to normal. He watched the water. And when you're ready, whenever you're ready, I'd like to have a conversation that isn't about any of this, about what comes next. Not urgently, not on a deadline, just when you're ready. The line was quiet for a long moment. She asked about you this morning, Elena said. Rosalie. She woke up and she asked if the man from Christmas was coming to Aunt Kara's today. He was quiet. I told her probably not today, Elena said. She said okay. She said maybe another day. A pause. She said she wanted to show you Biscuit. He looked at the water. The tugboat had moved on. The sky was doing something subtle and slow in the east, the first suggestion of color behind the gray. I'd like to meet Biscuit, he said. He heard Elena exhale. A long, slow exhale, the kind that carries something with it when it goes. Get some sleep, she said. You sound like you've been awake for 2 days. Close to it. Go home, Adrian. Yeah, he said. I'm going. Chub. The legal work took 3 weeks. Park handled most of it. The Delaware filing transfer, the renegotiation of 2 contracts that had become complicated by the exposure of Adrian's network-era financial history. A careful and thorough review of every outstanding liability that the events of early January had put back in motion. There were difficult conversations. There were mornings when Adrian sat across from lawyers and answered questions he had spent 3 years hoping he would never be asked directly. And he answered them honestly, and it cost him specific things in specific amounts that Park documented and that Adrian signed off on without argument. The Vail deal survived. Marcus Vail, who was 63 years old and had not gotten to 63 as a steel magnate by panicking at complexity, reviewed the disclosed history and called Adrian personally and said, in the measured tone of a man issuing a verdict, I do business with who a man is today, son, not who he was 10 years ago. We proceed. Adrian had not expected that. He sat with it for a long time after the call ended. He saw Rosalie for the first time after that night on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of January. Elena had arranged it carefully. A trip to a small park near her building, nothing structured, nothing that required explanation or ceremony. Rosalie arrived in a blue coat this time, carrying a drawing she had made at preschool that she presented to Adrian with the gravity of an official document. It was a house, crayon, red roof, yellow windows, 3 figures standing in front of it, of graduated heights. That's a family, Rosalie told him. She pointed to the tallest figure. That one's the daddy. I don't know what he looks like yet, so I made him tall. Adrian held the drawing with both hands. Elena was watching from the bench 6 feet away. She had a coffee she wasn't drinking and an expression she wasn't bothering to hide. Something soft and ruined and honest. The face of a woman watching something she had protected for 4 years begin to become what it was always supposed to be. He looks like a good daddy, Adrian said. Rosalie considered the drawing critically. His arms are too short, she said. I'll make a better one. I'd like that, he said. She nodded, satisfied, and ran toward the swings. He told Elena about her brother on a Sunday evening in February. Not the full scope of it, not Victor's specific language, not the word buzzed at her door panel, but the shape of it. That Victor had known about Kevin, had understood exactly how the information could be weaponized, had prepared it as a lever. She listened at her kitchen table with both hands around a mug she'd stopped drinking from halfway through. When he stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. He never got to use it, she said. No, because you moved first. Yes. She looked at her mug. My father doesn't know any of this. No. He's never going to know. No, Adrian said. He's not. She looked up at him. You're sure? The arrangement is permanent, Elena. No one from that organization has any reason to contact your father or anyone connected to you. The cost of violating the arrangement is everything they spent 30 years building. He held her gaze. They're rational people. Terrible, but rational. She absorbed this. The kitchen was quiet around them. Rosalie was asleep, the apartment in its nighttime stillness. I want to tell my father about you, she said. About Rosalie's father. Not everything, not the history, not any of this. Just that you exist, that you're in our lives. She paused. He needs to know that before he meets you, and I want him to meet you. Adrian looked at her. Okay? He's going to be difficult. I expect that. He's going to ask questions. I'll answer them. She looked at him steadily. He's going to ask what took you so long. The sentence sat between them with all its weight. And you'll tell him the truth, she said. Not a question. Not quite. I'll tell him I made a mistake I spent 4 years learning the cost of, Adrian said, and that I'm not going to make it again. She held his gaze for a long moment. The mug cooled in her hands. That's good enough, she said. He bought the brownstone in March. Brooklyn, 3 blocks from Elena's apartment, a building that had been built in 1887 and showed it. The kind of structure that accumulated history rather than concealing it, with thick walls and deep window sills and a staircase that announced every footstep. It needed work, significant work. He hired people who knew old buildings, who spoke about plaster and original hardwood with the seriousness of people handling something that deserved care, and he let them work. He spent 2 weekends there with Rosalie, who had opinions about everything. She wanted the kitchen to be yellow. She wanted a shelf in the living room specifically for her drawings. She wanted a room with enough space to run in, which she demonstrated by running the full length of the empty second floor with her arms out, her footsteps echoing off bare boards, laughing at the sound of herself. Elena stood in the doorway of the future living room on the second Saturday and watched her daughter run laps in an empty room and said nothing for a long time. She already knows, Elena said finally. Knows what? That this is hers. Elena looked at him. She's never going to feel like a guest in this house. You understand that. I'm counting on it, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The March light came through the unfinished windows and lay across the bare floor between them, and Rosalie came running back from the far end of the room and wrapped both arms around Elena's waist and said, breathlessly, Mama, there's an echo. And Elena put her hand in her daughter's hair and looked at Adrian over the top of Rosalie's head, and the thing in her eyes was not resolved. It was resolving, present tense, ongoing, and he understood that this was what it actually looked like. The thing he had thrown away and recovered, not an ending but a sustained act of choosing day after day without the promise of a clean arrival anywhere. He understood that was fine. More than fine. He asked her on an evening in late March. Not a production, not a restaurant or a gesture designed to be a story someone told. He asked her in the kitchen of his apartment, his old apartment, the penthouse, the last night before he moved the final things to the brownstone, while she was sitting on the counter eating cereal at 9 o'clock at night because Rosalie had wanted cereal for dinner, and Elena had decided, in the way she sometimes did, to simply be the kind of mother who ate cereal at 9 o'clock. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt true rather than staged. He had looked at it each morning and thought, not yet. And then that evening she had been sitting on his kitchen counter, eating cereal with her shoes off and her hair in a loose knot, and laughing at something Rosalie had said from the other room, and he had understood that not yet had become now. He didn't kneel. He stood across from her and took the ring out of his pocket and set it on the counter beside her bowl. And she looked at it and then looked at him, and her expression went through several things quickly, all of them honest, none of them simple. I'm not doing this right, he said. You're doing it fine, she said. Elena. He looked at her. I know I don't have a version of this that starts without the 4 years. I can't. He stopped. I can't undo that. I can't give you back the time, or give myself back the time, or give Rosalie. He stopped again. He was better at most things than he was at this. He was going to be bad at this in front of her, and he had decided that was all right. I don't have a speech. I want to be here. Every day. Whatever that costs and however long it takes and whatever it looks like when it's hard. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to let me. She looked at the ring on the counter, looked at him. You could have done this at the restaurant, she said. The one in Tribeca that you like. With the good wine. I could have. This is my kitchen counter at 9 p.m. with cereal. Yes. She reached out and picked up the ring, looked at it in the kitchen light. A simple thing, nothing excessive. The kind of ring that said, I paid attention rather than I paid. He had spent a long time on it. Rosalie's going to want to wear this, she said. I'll buy her one. Elena looked at him, then she laughed. Not a polished laugh. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below calculation. The kind you can't manufacture on a bad day. She laughed and put the ring on and looked at it on her hand and then looked back at him. And her eyes were bright with something that had nothing to do with sadness. Not entirely, though sadness was in it too, because real things always have some sadness in them, the weight of everything they cost. Okay, she said. Okay? You heard me. She held out the hand with the ring. Come here. He did. Jan. They told Rosalie on a Sunday morning in April. Elena had thought carefully about how. Had read things. Had talked with her pediatrician, had considered the words with the same deliberate precision she brought to everything that mattered most. She sat on the floor of the living room with Rosalie in her lap and Adrian across from them, and she said, in clear and simple language, that Adrian was Rosalie's father, that he had not been able to be with them before, but that he was here now, that he loved her, that this was good news. Rosalie listened to all of this with her particular focused attention. When Elena finished, Rosalie looked at Adrian. He held her gaze. She tilted her head the way she did when she was processing something. The particular tilt he had seen on Christmas Eve and every time since. That internal calibration, visible from the outside. I know, she said. Elena blinked. You? I know, Rosalie said again, with the patient tolerance of a person explaining something obvious. He has the same eyes as me. She looked at Adrian. I noticed. Adrian said nothing for a moment. When did you notice? He said. Christmas, she said. When you were walking in the snow. She appeared to consider whether further explanation was required and decided against it. Are we going to the yellow kitchen house now? Yeah, Adrian said. His voice came out rough and quiet. Yeah, we're going to the yellow kitchen house. Good. She climbed out of Elena's lap and went to get her shoes. I want to run in the room again. Elena looked at Adrian. He looked at her. There was nothing adequate to say about what had just happened, so neither of them said anything, which was right, which was exactly right, the silence holding what words would have made smaller. The brownstone was finished in May. The kitchen was yellow. The shelf in the living room held 11 drawings, curated by Rosalie with serious editorial judgment. The staircase still announced every footstep, and neither Adrian nor Elena made any effort to fix this because Rosalie had declared it was the house telling them things. Martin Hartwell came to dinner in June. He was 67 years old, and he had the particular bearing of a man who had survived something enormous and reorganized himself around the survival. Upright, watchful, careful with his warmth in the way people become when warmth has cost them before. He shook Adrian's hand at the door, and his grip said everything his face was controlling. Dinner was long. Rosalie sat next to her grandfather and fed him information about the house with the authority of a tour guide, and he listened with the particular helpless tenderness of a man encountering a grandchild who has his dead son's way of tilting her head. After dinner, after Rosalie was in bed, Martin sat with Adrian on the back steps, while Elena and Kara cleaned up inside. Kara had come too, and her revision of opinion had landed somewhere in the territory of provisional acceptance, delivered with the weight of a warning. Martin looked at the small backyard, the May darkness, the sound of the city over the fences. She told me some of it, Martin said. Elena, not all, Some. Yes, Adrian said. She protected you, Martin said. For years. She kept Rosalie away from whatever you were. He paused. I want you to understand that I know that. I know you know. Martin was quiet for a moment. Kevin was 26, he said, when he died. Adrian said nothing. There was nothing to say. I spent a long time being angry at the wrong things, Martin said. At the right things, too. But the wrong things more. He paused. Elena's mother, she used to say that anger was just grief that hadn't figured out where to go yet. A long pause. I think she was right about that. The yard was quiet. You hurt my daughter, Martin said. Not heated, just true. Yes, Adrian said. You hurt my granddaughter, in the sense that she grew up without a father who was capable of being one. Yes. And now you're here. Yes. Martin looked at the yard for a while. I'm 67 years old, he said. I've been wrong about enough things that I've stopped assuming I know how something's going to turn out. He paused. But I watch people. I've watched you all evening. He glanced at Adrian. You look at her the way a man looks at something he understands he nearly lost. I did nearly lose it, Adrian said. I know. Martin looked back at the yard. Don't lose it again. No, Adrian said. I won't. They sat for a while in the dark, the two of them, the sound of Elena and Kara laughing in the kitchen, drifting out through the screen door, and the city making its ordinary noise above the fences, and the night doing what nights do, holding everything that happened in it without comment, without judgment, without any particular interest in whether the people inside it deserved what they had or had simply, finally, stopped letting go of it. Right. The first Christmas in the brownstone, Rosalie put the star on the tree. She had insisted on this, had announced it in October, unprompted, with the certainty of a person who has been planning something for some time. The star went on last. She did it. Those were the terms. Adrian held her up for it, his hands around her small waist, her weight easy and real and warm against his palms. And she reached up with the star and placed it on the top branch, and it sat crookedly for a moment and then settled. And the lights they'd strung through the tree caught it and threw brightness across the ceiling and across Elena's face, where she stood watching from across the room. Rosalie patted the star once with her flat palm, satisfied. Good, she said. Adrian set her down. She ran immediately to tell Elena something important about the angle of the star that required immediate discussion. Adrian stood in the middle of the living room he had built and looked at the tree and at his daughter, and at the woman across the room who was crouching to Rosalie's level to receive the star report with appropriate seriousness, and the room smelled like pine and whatever Elena had been baking, and the city was quiet outside the thick old walls, and the drawings on the shelf made their crooked, serious row. And somewhere in all of it, in the warmth and the noise and the ordinary, unexceptional substance of an evening that would be forgotten before it was over, he found the thing he had been looking for the night he closed $430 million and felt nothing. It was smaller than he'd imagined it. That was the thing. He had spent years imagining it as something large, some summit, some definitive state of having arrived somewhere. But it was this: a yellow kitchen and a crooked star and a 4-year-old explaining the geometry of tree toppers to her mother. Cereal at 9 o'clock. A staircase that announced you were home. He looked at Elena. She looked up from Rosalie's report and found his eyes across the room. She did not smile exactly, but something in her face said yes, said it quietly, without announcement, the way real things usually arrived. Said, this is it. This is what it is. He looked back. Outside, the snow had started. It fell on the brownstone and on the street and on the city that did not stop for anyone's private joy any more than it stopped for their private catastrophe. And inside the house on the 3rd floor, the star sat slightly crooked on the top of the tree, and the lights held, and Adrian Moreau stood in the middle of everything he had almost not become and understood, without any remaining doubt that he was finally, completely home.